Hello everyone, it's Matt here and welcome to the final OcTRAINber video. It has been a very long, hard and arduous process to get here, and not to mention the fact that seemingly the New Haven Y3 wasn't that as photographed as much as some of the other locos which have probably been in the competition, with the exception of the Irish monorail train obviously. But this has no doubt been a very hard effort, especially because aside from like one website, photos were very rare. Some photos didn't give a lot of detail. It was quite complex to work out what was what. I had to go to models to find out what bits went where and various other things. But I think in total there's probably been at least 20 hours invested in this project in a combination of research, the actual building, revising the building, revising the revision of the original build, and then just doing other bits and pieces and experimenting and doing what and so forth. Now the initial build, you can actually go back on Facebook or Instagram and actually find out the original build. That was actually started roughly when it was actually announced. And by that point I'd already done like the scaling of it, so I'd already done like the actual mainframe. I'd done the mainframe and done some of the tender, but not a great deal. And I'd started the cab. I'd kind of done it the opposite way to how you should do it, which is start on the mechanism, then build upwards. I'd sort of done the scale, then did the cab, then did this, then did that, and then that, and then mechanism was sort of done that one, and then reverse. But it's done. I finished it. I'm not touching it again. Touch wood. But you know, I might come to it at a later date and add a bit more detail, add a few other bits and pieces, maybe give it a bit of an upgrade at a future point, possibly when I come to build it, if I do build it. But the detail that's gone into this has really been pushing my LDD limits, especially, and it's been pushing the limits of the program as well, because not every connection you can make properly, especially some of the Technic connectors where you're trying to rotate it at certain angles. And I actually found a really big issue just before recording this video, in that the loco was actually at an angle. So it was actually sort of doing a bit like that. So the cab was actually sitting lower than the front end was. And that was actually because I'd been doing the valve gear, not the valve gear, the sort of like eccentric rod assembly. And that hadn't worked out properly. And so what it had done is it had rotated the bit I needed to, and then rotated the whole model as well, slightly. Not enough to notice, but enough to cause the problem when you had the center one. Because I was just like, well, why is that just doing that? Like, it was all just one weird thing. I was just like, wait a minute, that's why. So this has gone through quite a lot of revision, and I've just had to spend about another 5-10 minutes just fixing that problem. And nevertheless, 20 plus hours later, here it is in all its glory. This is obviously the main file. I will discuss tender separately, but this is the main file, and I really had to go all out to try and get some of this detail in. Not everything is in. I will point that out now. Not everything is in place. There are a few provisos I do have to come to and cover for this model. Large about the use of custom parts and a few other bits and pieces. So this is the model. Obviously you've seen a lot of this before. For those of you wondering why the revolver is actually just pointing straight forward, Lego Digital Designer doesn't like it in its proper position. I like it where it's all fully down and rotated around towards the dome, which I think is actually just the way the parts interact. Physically it's fine, because obviously the stud it's in has a hole, and it's going into a jumper, which again has a recessed stud, so you can actually fit it on and it will work properly. But I don't think that's actually scripted into LDD, so that's why it actually looks like that. So that's, you know, one of the provisos. Now, since I've last looked at this model, or since I've last shown it off, I've done quite a lot of reworking, mostly to do with the footboards and running plate, and then obviously all the valve gear and that sort of. Has had a lot of work doing it as well. So the first thing I'd like to point out is that all the running boards are now actually within the 8 wide sort of scale, so they're actually all in line. That has been quite a lot of effort to do that. There's been quite a few changes as well. This especially, I've actually changed it from the 1x2 brackets to actually using the minifigure 1x1 neck bracket, and there's actually 4 of them. They're all aligned, and then I've had to rework some of the stuff behind there, and then that's actually managed to get these fully in line. The only issue is being that there's actually a bit of overlay on where the bits are, but yeah, it's inches in real life, I wouldn't really mind. Also, everything's a bit more in place now. I've actually fitted in the supports, or at least imitations of the supports, so it does look a bit different. Obviously I can't do this bit properly because of the motor being in the way, and I have had to go slightly out of scale with this section here. It's just a bit of extra reinforcement. I've tried to use I've used a modified plate with only 2 studs, or modified tile with 2 studs on top, just because it smooths it out a bit and adds a bit of reinforcement to the main sort of drive area. And I've changed the I want to call it a cylinder. I don't know precisely what it's for, but I've actually sort of flipped that 180 to get the front step. There should be a step going across here where you've got the actual steam pipe to the cylinder. I've not modelled that. You'll also notice that there's no valve gear rod in there. I haven't represented that. I probably could, or at least do a good approximation, but it's getting to the point where I'm just like, I think it's detailed enough, you know. And it's something I know I didn't say I wouldn't, or likely wouldn't, but I can always, if I do build it, you know, come back and actually fit something in to hide that. So that's always something I can do later. The front running board I've revised as well. So there's a few issues with that, and I've actually fitted in the steps going up as well. So this bit is actually a bit more squashed than it should be in real life. So there should be a bit more of a running sort of area here, but I've literally just fudged it together and got it in. So it is roughly, in terms of scale, roughly there, but because of the way I've had to do the steps, there should be a bit more gap here, so it should be a bit further, and this area is actually filled in as well. I don't know whether that's prototypical. I haven't been able to get enough photo resource to do it, but I have filled it in because it just adds to the structural integrity of the area and smooths it out. One of the other provisos is actually with the footboards, and it's the same on the tender as well, so I'll mention it now in case I forget later. But LEGO Digital Designer only has this 24mm flex tube at the smallest size. Obviously, if you're doing this in real life, you actually cut one to scale or to size. So obviously, that again is a limitation of LDD. If I was building it in real life, also I could do it to the size and do it however I needed to. And I've actually raised these up slightly compared to probably what it was like on the real thing, obviously, so that if it does sort of rock about a bit on slightly uneven track, there's a little bit of room there. And I'm quite proud of the way I've actually done the steam pipes as well. I'll just come back to that. So the way I've done that is actually used this modified 1x1 round plate with the bar attachment, and actually fitted that into the Technic beam and then just shoved a 1x1 round brick on top. And that's not something I've seen before. It's something that just sort of like, why don't I do that, and instead of trying to build the steam pipe from the boiler to the cylinders, do it the other way around, and it actually works quite well in that respect. And it has to have that sort of certain way of building it, because doing it from the Lego doesn't work properly. It's something to do with the scaling and the way the cylinders, because obviously it's Lego scale, I had to make them 10 wide. So again, limitations of it, Lego. I'll hold my hands up to that. But it just about looks in keeping, and obviously if I was able to thin it down I would do, but the valve gear and so on. The headlamp obviously has been changed a bit since I originally did it. I've reworked it, so you got this thin design. It's not entirely prototypical. The real one was more rounded with number boards on the side, but this is a good compromise, if you like, to get that. So it's actually a headlight brick turned on its side and then actually inverted compared to how normal people actually do it, and then obviously there's just a regular 1x1 trans clear round plate just put in there to actually represent the light. These steps here again are more neck brackets. I've used neck brackets quite a lot in this model. It's sort of become quite a used element, despite the fact I don't actually use it that much in my normal builds. And they're just there to give an extra step up. And I think that was actually so they could access the headlight. I'm not entirely sure, but it is on the model. Admittedly, not as deep as this. It is the real one. It's actually a lot thinner, but the neck bracket's the closest thing I could do in this scale. I could use cheese slopes inverted, but it doesn't work. The neck brackets is the closest thing I could do. The running board on the driver's side, so I'm calling this the driver's side, I don't know whether it is or not, but this on the driver's side, it actually is higher in the central bit because of the way it's actually attached using this piece of flex tube. There's nothing I can really do about that because of the flex tube. I could rework it, but in the whole, it looks fine. I don't really see the need to change it, if I'm going to be brutally honest. It does the job. You know, it just fits in quite nicely, and that little bit of a gap is fine as far as I'm concerned. You'll also notice that I've actually used the same method for the steps on both sides, so it's actually quite good, but I've been able to use flex tube on both sides to actually get that in. The reversing cylinder, this was something that wasn't on the original version I last showed you, but I've actually had to rework this area to actually get the sloping firebox in. Now that's, again, it should actually slope from the bottom here, so where the plate is, and I've taken a bit of a liberty with that and actually had it using the slope brick above. So I've had to rework this area of the boiler, so I've had to move the modified plate, so I'll just go and find the copy of it. It's in these parts here, quite close to the bottom. There it is. So it's this 2x2 plate with 2 studs on the side and then an extra bit on top. That's actually mounted on this side like that, and then obviously this section here is actually using these bottom studs to get in. And again, that's a bit of a workaround, and I've had to move it forward again, but on the whole, as far as I'm concerned, it looks okay. And I've also been able to use, because the studs are up and down, I've been able to use a clip. Then again, using this modified 1x1 round plate with the bar element, and actually been able to fit the steam cylinder or reversing cylinder in using that. And then that's obviously just a nozzle fitted in there, and the actual assembly is just made with that modified 1x1 round plate with the bar, and then a 1x1 round brick, and then another 1x1 round plate, but just a regular one, just to get that in. And I've used that element again for the valve gear here. So I said originally I just used a little bit of flex tube to combine them. I've been able to rejig that to actually use this piece here, so use it here. But again, this is another proviso. If you're going to build this in real life, you'd have to drill that out, like the hole. And I'm going to offend the purists here to drill it out, so then you can use this element here to crank it out if you're going to use as pure Lego as possible. Now obviously if you're going to use third-party elements, because you'd have to use trained bricks, sort of side rods for the wheels anyway, you'd have to use either Big Ben Bricks wheels or another third party's wheels, obviously because they're a smaller size than Lego do. You could use a custom bit of element there, and then that could actually fit on. And actually, if it was the Technic sort of hole, you'd actually leave that piece intact and then just snap it on, because you've obviously got a stud connection. Obviously that isn't necessarily true, because I know a lot of them actually make it slightly oversized so there's less friction, and obviously if you're going to do it, there's various ways of doing it using official and unofficial parts, but the official method, if you're going to use the LDD file and you're only using the side rods and wheels, would actually be to drill that element out and then use either a bit of track pin, like they use for holding RC tracks together, or a small bit of flex tube to actually just hold it in and keep it in. So obviously it's not going to be an express locomotive thundering about the layout. It's going to be fairly slow, so it shouldn't have too much of an issue in regards to that. I don't think there's actually been much in the way of other changes to the model outside of those. The loco has been pretty much left as is. The tender, I've done a bit of reworking. The bogies, I've pretty much left as is on the original, when I originally designed them. The only thing I have done is actually take off all the bearings. So it's all fully wheeled, and the bearings are actually off to the side here, so they can just be attached in the physical real world. The tender's had a few other changes as well, mostly to the headlight and the rear ladder. So I've actually added the rear ladder in. Now the real ladder on the real thing, if I pull up some research, and this one will show it off the best. So to see here that you have the ladder here, they actually hooks over. Now again, LEGO Digital Designer doesn't have a way of doing flexible tube. So if you're going to just use stock and then not flex it, this is actually the smallest I could actually get it. You could probably build it smaller in real life, by like using a minifigure hand or something just to thin out the top. This bit here is actually a bit bulkier than I'd like, but there's no real way to get around that at the moment. Anyway. And then the headlight, I've gone for a similar thing with the front of the loco using the headlight brick, but it's actually flipped 180 compared to how it is at the front. There's actually a little stud as well to actually elevate it off the main tender body, and that's just to enable it to have a bit more height, so it's a bit more prototypical. The other thing of domes as well. Now, there's photo evidence for both, but the New Haven seems to have used two different sort of styles of dome with these 080 switches. The first one is what I'd call the stock option. It's actually a very long sort of 2x6 with rounded ends, and that's pretty much, from what I've seen, common to pretty much every tender, because it obviously allows a nice wide access. So if you're at a watering point and you haven't got much give in how far you can take the water stand or the water tower or the chute or what have you that's actually giving the water, you've got that nice wide place where you can do that. Obviously these are yard switches. They're not likely to go very far out of their yard, with the exception of maybe a trip working or maybe back to the engineering works for their annual inspection or for some heavy repairs or boiler swaps and that sort of thing. So obviously, because they're in a yard and the yards were fairly modern, most yards that were using these switches would have been fairly modernised yards by the time these were introduced. Obviously they would have had probably fairly new water tanks, water towers and that sort of thing, so that big access hatch probably wasn't required, so they've opted for this much smaller dome instead. Now, some photographic evidence seems to suggest there were two, one on each side. Now, obviously I'm putting that down to just the angle of the photo. It could be that the actual dome is actually removable and they've actually just put it to one side, and that's why it looks like that. But I've just gone for a central dome. It makes the most sense. I'll just plonk it in the middle there. This tender is actually the original power function tender actually designed. So there's been aside from the ladder and the bogies, there's actually not been much of a change. So I'll actually go into that file in a bit. The only other thing I will point out is that this corner here has had to change. It's actually suffered a bit. So to fit this sort of access ladder in, I actually had to remove this sort of like curved 1x1 brick, and actually use some plates instead, just to fill that in. So obviously that is a bit of a negative, but to be honest, the very small visual change I'm fine with. It's a bit of a compromise, but it's really been the only way to get the ladder in. The tender is a really odd design in the fact that it's using a lot of snots to actually get that perfect height, sort of for the tender, so like the body height. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a compromise. Lego scale is not the best scale to build smaller fiddly stuff in, and this sort of scale, obviously you'd probably want to build a bit bigger for that. That's it as far as I'm concerned for the main loco model. Obviously, there's been a lot of work gone into this, and honestly, as far as I'm concerned, I'm happy with it. The only other thing with the tender I will point out, I've just remembered, is that I've actually added in the brake cylinder here. Now, again, photos of the USRA tenders, if you're looking for the yard switch version, are pretty much restricted to just modelled variants. So that's low scale, HO scale, and that sort of stuff. Actual photos of the real one are really hard to find, and again, a lot of the photos that you can find are very heavily shadowed. They're not done in yards and stuff where there's good lighting, so finding the underframe detail has been a bit of a pain. I was able to sort of do this, and this actually uses the introduced in the last couple of years 1x1 round plate with a hole in. Then there's just a couple of taps, and then there's been some technical elements to connect those in. The reason why I've actually changed this is because there's now a 2x6 plate there instead of a 1x6, and that is because I've actually changed the front of the tender to have these steps in. These steps are probably the most accurate. There was actually supposed to be 2 steps in them, but again, it's a bit of a compromise. They're the smallest really I could do. Really, they should be a bit deeper, but I don't want to go too far, obviously, because then it might be fouling track work and that sort of stuff. So that's just a neat compromise. So they're actually fouling the wheels. So nice bit of detail. Unfortunately, it has to go. So here is obviously the tender that was in the previous segment of video. And I've just literally did an import of this tender back into the main model. It saves having to fiddle about trying to rework the tender in that world and to match this one. So I actually just imported the file, which you can do, and then just deleted the rest of the bits. So the only difference in these models is I've actually done a few other bits and pieces. So again, the domes are matching. So this is the one I was talking about, where it's got the 6 wide. The only other variance between these actually the headlights. So I've actually been working a bit on the headlights, or backup lights I should say. So we've actually got the one in here where it's got the headlight brick. This one is what I did originally with the megaphone, which is kind of the best one in terms of shape, but not in terms of size. It's really bulky and really oversized. And it's far too high off the actual body, as far as I'm concerned. But again, it's a nice one-piece one to get it in. And again, here is using the neck brackets again. I'll keep using this part because it seems to have been a good part for this model. And it's obviously connected to a Technic 1L cylinder or beam. And then you've obviously got the 1x1 round plate for the headlight again. So there's a variety of options going for the headlights. Personally, I'll just go with the headlight brick. It seems to be the most space effective, not necessarily the most accurate because they're actually rounded, but to actually simulate that sort of like dome at the front. So you'd have like the main sort of shaft where the dome is, where the light comes out, and then you've got this smaller sort of like cylindrical body. Lego don't actually make anything like that, because the 2x2 sort of conical piece. So I go and find a copy of that now, which I think is not in there. Right there, it's in that one. Yeah, this one here, the satellite dish as they call it. That's too big for the headlight, so this is just a bit of a compromise to actually just not have it in there at all. So yeah, that's it. As far as I can remember in terms of actual stuff I need to go over for the model. So obviously, as far as I'm concerned, the model's complete. I'll be taking some renders and doing a few other bits and pieces, and uploading them to Flickr and submitting the entry. So yeah, that's it. All the hard work over for OcTRAINber, is gone. So I can actually just focus now on the Bricklink one. Yay! Oh, it's been hard work. So anyway, that's it for the OcTRAINber series, and that's it. So I'm going to start working on other stuff, and see you later.